We've discussed transnational capital, the British Empire. We've also discussed the Sabbatine Frankists. Today, we will put the two ideas together and show how the alliance between these two different forces have created modernity, or the ideas that underpin our society today, including Marxism, Darwinism, individualism, liberalism, and Freudian psychology. All right, so we will talk a lot about Jews today, but just as a caveat, it's important for us to remember that it's easy to see a Jewish conspiracy everywhere. But things are actually much more complicated than that. The argument I want to make to you today is that the Jews are a construct and tool of empire. In other words, they're really the middle managers. They're the ones who help manage the empire. And if the Jews weren't around, then it would be the Indians or some other group. An empire needs scapegoats. It needs middle managers. And for the past 200 years, the Jews have served the purpose. Something else that I will show you today is that the empire, which is transnational capital, they get all the profit. They hide behind the scenes. They're the shadows. And they make all the money. And it's really the Jews get all the blame. And what we'll discuss next class is that this is the same thing that will happen today. Okay? So that's the argument I will make to you today. All right, so let's discuss the British Empire. The British Empire is unique in human history in that it controls the entire world. And it's just a small island, right? It's a small island with very little resources. And it's able to control the entire world because it controls global trade. It has the world's greatest navy. It also has the Bank of England, which is really transnational capital. And English becomes the lingua franca of the world and has colonies throughout the world as well. So for the British Empire, the way they control the world, it's a very simple concept. As long as the British Empire is able to control the seaways, then it controls the world. The great crisis, the great problem, great threat is that an empire will emerge within the Eurasian continent. It's called the heartland, okay? And this could be Germany, it could be Russia, it could be China. But if it's able to emerge, eventually, like the Mongol Empire, it's able to conquer the entire Eurasian continent, and through railways, it's able to link up Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia all together into one trading bloc. And then you don't need the seaways anymore. If that were to happen, then the British Empire would go bankrupt. Because remember, the British Empire, with the Bank of England, transnational capital, it's really a Ponzi scheme. It needs people to keep on buying into the empire for it to continue to succeed. So the greatest threat is a great power emerging in the heartland. And throughout history, that was either the French, the Ottoman Empire, the Germans, or the Russians. So the grand strategy of the British is to create as much chaos and conflict in Europe as much as possible. You always want your enemies fighting each other, okay? And that's just the core strategy of the British. Not very hard, okay? So again, as we discussed, there are four major enemies that the British have faced throughout their history as an empire. The French, they're able to defeat because of the French Revolution as well as the Napoleonic Wars. Then they had to face the Russians. And the Russians were the greatest threat because the Russians had the largest land empire. And they were the most likely to unify the Eurasian continent. They also faced the Ottomans, and they also faced the Germans. Now, the British could not seem as though they were interfering in European politics, because all that would do is anger the Europeans and unite the Europeans against the British. They had to do it using subterfuge, secretly, using intelligence operatives, right? And so, of course, what happened was that they developed different strategies in order to divide and conquer Europe. What they would do is promote revolutionary movements using transnational capital. And we'll discuss these revolutionary movements later on. They also industrialized Japan because they saw Japan as a natural ally in the world. Okay, so you know that in Japan, they underwent the Meiji Restoration, and in only a few decades, they were able to industrialize, so much so that they defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. And you may not know this, but transnational capital, the British and the Americans, financed a great deal of Japan's industrialization because the Anglo-American Empire wanted Japan as an ally. Okay? It was a natural ally. What they would also do is establish resource colonies. So Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, these are all resource colonies. And the idea is that you can now use manpower to fund your armies, okay? And the last strategy is to, wherever you can, steal as much resources as possible as fast as you can. And this was true in India and China and Africa as well. Okay, so this is the grand strategy of the British. And they needed agents to help them in these endeavors, and the 17 Francas made the most sense, right? So the advantages that 17 Francas brought to the British Empire were fourfold. The first is that they already had a diaspora, right? And they were also crypto Jews. They also disguised their identity as Jews as well. So they were able, as a network, to conduct intelligence, do blackmail, and subvert governments, okay? They also had access to a lot of transnational capital. They themselves were extremely wealthy. Now, last major advantage, and the most important, is that they had revolutionary cells and networks. Okay, so remember, the 17 Francas, they believed that they were saving the world. They believed they had to destroy the world in order to save it. And these made perfect revolutionaries. And I'll show you this as we move on. Okay? Now, the last reason that we won't discuss much today, but we'll focus a lot on in our last class, is the idea of eschatology, where the British Empire, they are Christians, and they believe that they must use Jews as a pawn in order to force the return of Jesus. This is something that we'll discuss a great deal next class, but I want to focus on these three reasons first, okay? All right. And it made sense for the British to align themselves with the 17 Francas because the way they saw the world was the same. Okay? As an empire, as transnational capital, remember, you're focused on extracting as much energy as possible from your workers. So you're very materialistic. Well, the Francas were also very materialistic as well, right? They believed that the body was more important than the spirit. Second is that both the Francas and the British, they wanted to obtain power through chaos, instability, and regime change. And both were very focused on the pursuit of wealth and power. So these were natural allies. Sorry. All right, so let's use an example of how the Ottoman Empire, let's use an example of how the British Empire worked the 17 Francas. And the most obvious example is the Ottoman Empire. So for the longest time, the Ottoman Empire was the most powerful force in Eurasia. And this was the Ottoman Empire at its height in 1683. Remember, in 1666 is when Zevi declared himself the Messiah. And remember that Zevi had to convert to Islam, and the people who followed him into Islam are called the Dome. Okay, the Dome are very important people. But over time, empires will decay. In 1853, Russia attacked the Ottoman Empire, and this led to the Crimean War. The British and the French feared Russian expansionism, and so they support the Ottomans. And the Ottomans were able to defend themselves against the Russians. But this alliance came at a cost to the Ottomans. The British and the French made the Ottomans take out loans in order to finance the war. And over time, because of interest, these loans start to overwhelm the Ottoman financial system. And so what happened was the British and the French bankers came and established their own tax administration. And so from now on, a third of all revenue, tax revenue, that the Ottoman Empire generated would go directly to the French and British bankers. Okay? And so this caused the Ottoman Empire to decline rapidly over time. And the French and the British, they set up a central bank controlled by foreigners. And not only that, but they set their own tax administration. So they had their own tax agents. And that's why these bankers became very wealthy. Guess what? These bankers had a natural ally in the Dome, right? The Sabbatean Frankists. And so these Sabbatean Frankists also became very wealthy. Now what happened is that the Ottoman Sultan didn't really like this relationship. He didn't like being bossed around by these bankers. And so he went to the Germans. And so now the Germans were now financing the Ottoman Empire, and they were now allies. And so the British and the French didn't like this. And so what the Dome did was start to finance a revolutionary group called the Young Turks. The Young Turks believed in three things. They believed in secularism, no religion. They believed in liberalism, and they believed in individualism. Okay, just basically the basic ideas of modernity. And eventually, the Young Turks were able to overwhelm the Ottoman Empire and establish something called the Republic of Turkey, which is still around today. So guys, the Republic of Turkey, if you go to Turkey, it's a Dome that control Turkey. Okay? All right? So remember, the Dome come from Zabtai Zevi. They are crypto Jews. They pretend to be Muslim, but they're in fact Jews. And these three Dome will help to found the Republic of Turkey, and they still control Turkey together. Okay, so that's an example of an alliance between the Sabbatean Frankists and the British Empire. Another example of an alliance is, of course, the Rothschild banking dynasty. This is Jacob Rothschild with King Charles of England. And this alliance goes back hundreds of years. And the Rothschild family is, of course, one of the most powerful banking families in the world. So there's a story of how they got rich. In 1815, Napoleon and the British fought the Battle of Waterloo, and this would determine who controlled Europe. In the battle, the British and the Germans together were able to defeat the French. When this news happened, an agent of the Rothschild got into a Corvette, which is a fast boat, and they sailed all the way back to London to tell the Rothschild the news. The Rothschild controlled the media at that point. And so the media told everyone, oh my God, we lost the Battle of Waterloo. So as you can imagine, people start to panic. There was a stock market crash, and then the Rothschild bought up all the assets. And that's how they became extremely wealthy. And this is a strategy that they continue to use throughout their history. Okay, so where the 17th Frankists and where the British Empire collaborated the most was in philosophy, in developing a understanding of the world that allowed them to amass more power, okay? So let's go quickly over some basic British philosophy. So British philosophy at this time was controlled by Freemasons. We'll discuss the Freemasons more next class, okay? But the main purpose was to really deny God and truth. And there were three major strands of this philosophy. Okay, the first major strand is what we call empiricism, and the most famous proponent of this is John Locke. John Locke argued that we are born with a tabula rasa, a blank mind, okay, a blank slate. And so whatever information comes into us is through experience, only through experience, okay? Not through reasoning, not because of God, not because of imagination or inspiration, not because of the divine spark in us, but through just experience and only experience, okay? David Hume proposed a new idea called skepticism. And he goes even further than John Locke. John Locke says that we experience the world, and that's how we know the world. Now, the entire basis of science is the idea called induction. If I see a white swan 1,000 times, I can then infer that all swans are white. Okay, this is the idea of induction. This is what underlies the scientific process. Without the idea of induction, you can never access truth. And what David Hume says is, induction does not work. You cannot prove that just because you've never seen a black swans don't exist. Okay, you could have seen 10 million white swans. That does not prove that all swans are white and can only be white. And he's right, because there are black swans, okay? So what he's saying is the very project of truth-seeking, the very project of epistemology, of philosophy, it's all nonsense. Not only that, but we don't really know things. All we do is remember things. Okay? So when we say that Rome is the capital of Italy, we think we know it, but we don't know it. It's all just convention. It's all just we agree to call a place in Italy Rome. We agree that that's a capital, okay? It's all just agreement. But there's no basis for truth here. All right? So now this raises the problem of, okay, if God doesn't exist, if truth doesn't exist, if there's no way for us to reach truth, if there's no way for us to discover truth, then what can we do? And so Jeremy Bentham proposed the idea of utilitarianism. The way we understand the world is just through utility. If it is good for the majority of people, then it must be good. If it causes pleasure for the majority of people, then that policy must be good. If people want to eat candy all the time and makes them feel happy, then we should allow them to eat candy. And that is inherently good. Okay? And then what his disciple, John Stuart Mill, will do is he'll take the basis of this idea of utility as a basis of good and evil to create liberalism. Okay? So the very idea of liberalism today is based on utilitarianism. So for example, homosexuality. Why is homosexuality good? Because first of all, homosexuals want to be homosexuals, okay? You force them not to be homosexuals, they'll feel bad. But also what's more important is they're not doing any harm to anyone, right? So if you just do the mathematics and you recognize that allowing homosexuality is a positive, and that positive and brings more pleasure to the world, then you should allow it. Okay? And this religious talk of it goes against the will of God, it's against the Bible, it's just nonsense. We should just focus on first principles and just focus on utility. Does it bring benefit to people? And this is the very basis of British philosophy. And as you can appreciate, this aligns very much with the 17th Frankist idea of the world, right? All right, so this is John Stuart Mill, and this is Jeremy Bentham. Okay, and not only that, but once this philosophy is in place, they are now going to promote certain scientists that agree with this philosophy, or whose findings support this philosophy. And the most famous, of course, is Charles Darwin. Okay, Charles Darwin, right? When his book, The Origin of Species, came out, it was an instant bestseller. And within 20 years, it became the mainstream understanding of how we originated, even though if you actually read the book, even though if you actually look at the science, it's still very problematic. All right, so this is very strange how science is supposed to be a field of rigorous debate, rigorous science, right? But the evidence supporting evolution is limited. And again, we discuss this all the time, but it doesn't explain to us how we come to think, right? It explains to us how we develop our bodies. Sure, yeah, from apes we get humans, that makes sense, but intellectually, we're a lot more imaginative than apes. How to explain that? And he doesn't explain that. Okay? And you're not even allowed to ask this question. All right. So, as this alliance between the 17th Frankists and the British Empire is growing, there's certain individuals that become these meeting points of these two different groups, okay? So let's discuss two of them. The first is Benjamin Disraeli. And he's important because he becomes the first and only Jewish prime minister of the British Empire, okay? My second person is Leonon de Rothschild, who is here to the Rothschild banking family. They're best friends, and you could argue the Rothschild banking family financed Benjamin Disraeli's banking career, okay? And in 1844, Benjamin Disraeli will publish a book called Coningsby. It's a novel, okay? It's not a memoir, but it's a novel. But if you read it, people will say that the characters are very much based on people that Disraeli knows. And Disraeli is very explicit in telling us why he wrote the book And the idea is to tell the British people more about Jews, because Jews right now in history in Britain, they're an exotic species. And it's also to establish how Jews think. Now, what's amazing about this novel is that you read it, and it's really strange, but it conforms to every single anti-Semitic stereotype that we say today. Today, you say that Jews rule the world. You say that Jews work together, they conspire together. You say that Jews think that they're superior to everyone else. You are labeled as an anti-Semite, okay? But if you read this novel, and we'll read this novel together, this is exactly what Benjamin Disraeli says, okay, about the Jewish people. All right, so let's read it together. Okay, so Amber, can you read, please? This is the introduction to the book Conan Speak. Okay.
In asserting the paramount character of the what is it?
Keep going.
Okay. Polity and the majesty of the theocratic principle, it became necessary to ascend to the origin of the Christian Church and to meet in a spirit worthy of a critical and comparatively enlightened age the position of the descendants of that race who were the founders of Christianity. The modern Jews had long labored under the odium and stigma of medieval malevolence.
Okay, so what we're saying is this. Christianity is a great religion, but it's important that we look at the origins of Christianity and who founded Christianity, okay? Which is the Jews. We know it's the Jews who created Christianity, okay? Okay, keep on going.
In the Dark Ages, when history was unknown, the passions of societies, undisturbed by traditionary experience, were strong, and their convictions, unmitigated by criticism, were necessarily fanatical.
So during the Dark Ages, everyone was just stupid, okay? Keep on going.
The Jews were looked upon in the Middle Ages as an accursed race, the enemies of God and man, the especial foes of Christianity. No one in those days paused to reflect that Christianity was founded by the Jews, that its divine author, in his human capacity, was a descendant of King David.
Okay, divine author, of course, is Jesus, okay? Keep on going.
That his doctrines avowedly were the completion, not the change, of Judaism, that the apostles and the evangelists whose names men daily invoked and whose volumes they embraced with reverence were all Jews, that the infallible throne of Rome itself was established by a Jew, and that a Jew was the founder of the Christian churches of Asia.
So this really is not just saying that Jews are important, but he's also saying that Jews are superior because they're the ones who created Christianity. And what he will say later on is Jews created everything because Jews are the most intellectually creative people in the world, okay? And remember, Disraeli is a Jew, and he's one of the Jewish elite, okay? All right, let's keep on going. All right, so in the novel, the major character is Sidonia, who is a wealthy Jewish person based on the Rothschild family, okay? And he's going to explain to us how Jews control the world. All right, can you read, Alan?
Yeah, okay.
Sidonia
was descended from a very ancient and noble family of Aragon.
Okay, Aragon is in Spain. Okay, so we discussed how before, for 100 years, the Jews were part of the Spanish Muslim Empire. But when they were reconquered, they were forced to leave or convert. Keep on going.
That, in the course of ages, had given to the state many distinguished citizens. In the priesthood, its member had been peculiarly eminent. Besides several prelates, they counted among their numbers an archbishop of Toledo and a Sidonia. In a season of great danger and difficulty, had exercised for a series of years the paramount office of Grand Inquisitor.
Okay, so even after the Christians reconquered Spain, and after some Jews converted to Catholicism, okay, first of all, these Jews kept their faith secret. So even though on the outside they were Catholics, in the inside they were still Jews. Okay, they were crypto Jews. But much more importantly, these Jews rose to supreme power within the Catholic Church in Spain. The irony is that the Spanish Inquisition, where Catholics were looking for Jews who were pretending to be Christians, the leadership were Jews. The leadership were crypto Jews, okay? This is what this really is saying. I'm not saying this is true, but this is what this really is saying, okay? Keep on going.
Yet, strange as it may sound, it is nevertheless a fact of which there is no lack of evidence that these illustrious family during all this period, in common with 2/3 of the Aragonese nobility, secretly adhered to the ancient faith and ceremonies of their fathers, a belief in the unity of the God of Sinai, and the rites and observances of the laws of Moses.
Okay, so guys, 2/3 of nobility in Spain were crypto Jews. Catholics disguised, Jews disguised as Catholics, okay? All right. So again, I'm not saying this is true, but it's striking and really strange that a Jewish man who's very powerful, who will become Prime Minister of England, he's writing this stuff, okay? He's putting in the mouth of basically a Rothschild. Okay, can you read, Amber?
The Sidonians of Aragon were
New Christians.
Were Nouveau Christianos. Some of them, no doubt, were burned alive at the end of the 15th century under the system of Torquemada. Many of them, doubtless, were the San Benito, but they kept their titles and estates, and in time reached those great offices to which we have referred. During the long disorders of the Peninsular War, when so many openings were offered to talent and so many opportunities seized by the adventurous, a cadet of younger branch of this family made a large fortune by military contracts and supplying the commissariat of the different armies. At the peace prescient of the great financial future of Europe, confident in the fertility of his own genius, in his original views of fiscal subjects, and his knowledge of national resources, this Sidonia, feeling that Madrid or even Cadiz could never be a base on which the monetary transactions of the world could be regulated, resolved to emigrate to England, with which he had, in the course of years, formed considerable commercial connections. He arrived here after the Peace of Paris with his large capital. He staked all he was worth on the Waterloo loan, and the event made him one of the greatest capitalists in Europe.
Okay, so these crypto Jews, they had a lot of money, but not only that, but they have an information network, okay? Because they have relatives, friends all throughout Europe. And they are intellectually superior, and so they know how history will develop. And they see a great money-making opportunity in war. So when these wars come out, what these Jews do is they support both sides, so they can't possibly lose. And then they make a lot of money, and then they figure out where it is in the most advantage to be. So they have absolutely no national loyalty. They don't see themselves as belonging to a certain group of people, a certain nation. They see themselves as first and foremost Jews. Okay, so when the time presented itself properly, these Sidonians, they will migrate, some of them, not all of them, will migrate from Spain into continental Europe and up to England because they saw England as the future. And of course, from England, they will also migrate to the United States of America. Okay. Alan, can you read, please?
The only human quality.
So the father goes to England and now he establishes the banking dynasty, and his son will now inherit everything. Okay, and so this is about the son. Keep on going.
Yeah. The only human quality that interested Sidonia was intellect. He cared not whence it came, where it was to be found. Creed, country, class, character, in this respect were alike indifferent to him.
Okay, so again, this is a very anti-Semitic trope where Jews don't like the idea of nation or culture or religion. They like the idea of ideas. Okay, and one anti-Semitic trope is that Jews have a conspiracy to degrade religion, culture, society, nation state in order to advance their own interests. Okay, keep on going.
The author, the artist, the man of science never appealed to him in vain. Often he anticipated their wants and wishes. He encouraged their society, was as frank in his conversation as he was generous in his contributions. But the instant they ceased to be authors, artists, or philosophers, and their communications arose from anything but the intellectual quality which had originally interested him. The moment they were rash enough to approach intimacy and appeal to the sympathizing man instead of the congenial intelligence, he saw them no more.
Okay, so this is a really important idea where, again, this is propaganda for Jews, right? So this really is saying how great Jews are. Jews are intellectual. But you know what Friedrich Hegel will say is that without culture, there can be no great ideas. Okay? Ideas emerge from community, from culture, from belonging. Okay, so think of Homer or Dante, or even the Yahwehs, okay? If you think that you are intellectual above culture, above nation, above people, you will not produce great ideas. Okay, keep on going.
It was not, however, intellect merely in these unquestionable shapes that commanded his notice. There was not an adventurer in Europe with whom he was not familiar. No minister of state has such communication with secret agents and political spies as Sidonia. He held relations with all the clever outcasts of the world. The catalogue of his acquaintance in the shape of Greeks, Armenians, Moors, secret Jews, Tartans, Geese.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Okay, look, the idea is that Jews are international, first and foremost international. They're cosmopolitan, right? And as a result, what will happen is that over time, because he is in contact with so many different groups, he's so intellectual, he's always reading his history, he comes convinced that the superior race, the greatest race of humanity are the Jews. Why? Because unlike other races, the Jews refuse to intermarry. They refuse to breed with other cultures. And so as a result, the Jews are first and foremost pure. They are Aryan. Okay, this is really ironic again because the Nazis will use this idea 100 years later to justify the Holocaust. But at this time in history, the Jews think that they are the superior race because they are the most pure, okay? So this is all that is saying. All right, can you read, Amber?
In this country, says Sidonia.
So this country, of course, is England, right?
Since the peace, there has been an attempt to advocate a reconstruction of society on a purely rational basis. The principle of utility has been powerfully developed. I speak not with lightness of the labors of the disciples of that school. I bow to intellect in every form, and we should be grateful to any school of philosophers, even if we disagree with them. Doubtly grateful in this country, where for so long a period of our statesmen were in so pitiable an arrear of public intelligence. There has been an attempt to reconstruct society on a basis of material motives and calculations.
Okay, so again, this is the idea of utilitarianism, right? This is Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill. Keep on going.
It has failed. It must ultimately have failed under any circumstances. Its failure in an ancient and densely peopled kingdom was inevitable. How limited is human reason, the profoundest inquirers are most conscious. We are not in debt to the reason of man for any of the great achievements, which are the landmarks of human action and human progress. It was not reason to be besieged Troy. It was not reason that sent forth the Saracen from the desert to conquer the world.
Okay, so the Saracens are the Muslims, okay? Keep on going.
That inspired the Crusades, that instituted the monastic orders. It was not reason that produced the Jesuits. Above all, it was not reason that created the French Revolution. Man is only truly great when he acts from the passion. Never irresistible, but when he appeals to the imagination. Even Mormons count more votaries than Bentham. And you think then that an imagination once subdued the state, imagination may now save it. Man is made to adore and to obey. But if you will not command him, if you give him nothing to worship, he will fashion his own divinities and find a chieftain in his own passions.
So, Solon is emphasizing the limitations of British philosophy, right? Locke, Hume, Bentham, Mill, they're all limited. And so what the British need is for the Jews, with their imagination, with their religion, to save the British, to lead the British, to guide the British. Okay, does that make sense? So again, this is trying to establish Jewish supremacy. Okay, all right, this is much too long, okay? But what he's really saying is, like, listen, we Jews, we want to be part of society. We are naturally conservative, but we also want to practice our religion. So if you, at any point, if you, the British, at any point, try to restrain us, if you try to take away our religious rights, we will rebel against you. We are cohesive. We will stand up for liberalism. We will stand up for secularism. We will stand up for individualism. Because these three philosophies are what most protect us from religious overreach. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what he's saying. So Alan, can you start here? You never observe.
You never observe a great intellectual movement in Europe in which the Jews do not greatly participate. The first Jesuits were Jews.
This is true, okay, guys. The secret intelligence agency of the Catholic Church were first Jews. This is true. Keep on going.
That mysterious Russian diplomacy which so alarmed Western Europe is organized and principally carried on by Jews.
So the Jews are the agents of the Russian Empire. Keep on going.
That mighty revolution which is at this moment preparing in Germany, and which will be, in fact, a second and greater reformation, and of which so little is as yet known in England, is entirely developing under the auspices of Jews, who almost monopolize the professorial chairs of Germany.
Okay, so this hasn't happened yet. Okay, he's saying this is the year 1844. He's saying like the revolution that you will see later on in Germany, we organized it, man. We Jews organized it. Why? Because we control the academies, we control the professorships of Germany. Keep on reading.
Neither the founder of spiritual Christianity, who is Regius Professor of Divinity in the University of Berlin, is a Jew.
Okay, so it keeps on going. Okay, we won't read it. About how many professors are Jews? Okay, do you understand? Now, what's amazing is, again, this came out in 1844 and 1848. There were revolutions throughout Europe, throughout Germany. So how did the Israeli know about this? Well, possibly because the British were helping to finance all of this, right? Remember the alliance between the British and Septine Frankists. All right, can you read, Amber?
Okay,
from here, okay?
A few years back, we were applied to by Russia. Now, there has been no friendship between the court of St. Petersburg and my family. It has Dutch connections, which have generally supplied it, and are representations in favor of the Polish Hebrews, a numerous race, but the most suffering and degraded of all the tribes, have not been very agreeable to the Caesar.
The Tsar. Okay, so what he's saying is, we're very rich, and nation states come and look for us for money, okay? So Russia wants a loan from us. We said, no, you mistreat the Jews. So we're not going to give you any money, okay? The Russians are notorious for being anti-Semitic at this stage. Okay, keep on going.
However, circumstances drew to an approximation between the Romanovs.
The Romanovs are the controlling family of Russia.
And the Sidonians. I resolved to go myself to St. Petersburg. I had, on my arrival, an interview with the Russian Minister of Finance, Cankrin. I beheld the son of a Lithuanian Jew. The loan was connected with the affairs of Spain. I resolved on repairing to Spain from Russia. I traveled without intermission. I had an audience immediately on my arrival with the Spain minister, Senor Mendizabal. I beheld one like myself, the son of a Nuevo Cristiano, a Jew of Aragon. In consequence of what transpired at Madrid, I went straight to Paris to consult the president of the French Council. I beheld the son of a French Jew, a hero, an imperial marshal, and and very appropriately so, for who should be military heroes if not those who worship the Lord of hosts? And is Solute a Hebrew? Yes, and others of the French marshals, and the most famous, Massena, for example. His real name was Manasseh. But to my anecdote, the consequence of our consultations was that some northern powers should be applied to in a friendly and mediative capacity. We fixed on Prussia, and the president of council made an application to the Prussian minister, who attended a few days after our conference. Count Arnhem entered the cabinet, and I beheld a Prussian Jew. So you see, my dear
Conisby,
that the world is governed by a very different personage from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes.
So it's Jews who control the world, because only Jews get along together, okay? So if Jews didn't exist, the world couldn't get along, right? And Jews hide everywhere. And that's how the world works, guys. You think the person in charge is in charge, but actually it's a secret society of Jews. Now, again, I'm not saying this is true. I just find it really weird that Benjamin Disraeli is writing about this, okay? And again, he's getting a lot of this information from the Rothschild banking family. So the Rothschild, for whatever reason, think they control the world, okay? So I don't go much into this in detail, but I will point out that there is evidence that this is true. All right, so we're going to look at the Communist Revolution in Russia together. I also want to keep you in mind that I don't think this is true, actually. There's evidence this is true, but I do not think this is true. Why Disraeli is writing about this, we will discuss next